Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here at the Javits Center on this beautiful day. My name is Max Dubison, and I'm joining you from Indigo Ag. I really want to thank our hosts here at the Nest Summit today, as well as my fellow panelists. They're going to join me from virtual land. And then everybody who's here today, as well as folks that are going to be listening to this recorded. Appreciate your time and your participation joining us in this discussion. So I lead the global carbon policy and compliance team at Indigo Ag. We're an ag tech startup headquartered here in the US in Boston and Memphis. And our mission is harnessing nature to help farmers sustainably feed the planet. I've been working in carbon markets since 2008, and over that time, there's been an increasing focus in my work on agriculture and land use change. And how do we build the policy and scientific frameworks to really drive carbon finance to real climate solutions on the ground? You know, I think we heard a really great setup during that last panel about both sort of the devastating environmental effects of climate change that are coming and the existential threats that are being posed. I think the recent IPCC report really stated this very plainly with a really deep and broad scientific consensus behind it. So now we've seen how agriculture contributes to those impacts as a greenhouse gas source. I think it's important, and in this session what we'll focus on is the opportunities presented there, how farmers can help both reduce the direct emissions from their cultivation activities, but also draw carbon down out of the atmosphere and put it in the soils, while at the same time benefiting the food systems and the environment around them. I think we've also seen recently a lot of exciting activity in the voluntary carbon markets, and this is, you know, the Nest Summit's covering a lot of different aspects of climate and environment. So I'm excited that we're going to get to dive into the wonkier world of carbon markets here. So let's turn to the panel. We're going to dive into that world together. We're going to discuss carbon offsets, what they are, offset quality, where agriculture fits into those carbon markets, and then some of the supply and demand dynamics that are kind of driving that. So with that, I'd like to introduce my panelists. Looking good up there, guys. We'll start in the order that I'm seeing you on the screen. So what I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to introduce you all by name, tell everybody where you're from, and then I'm going to call on you one by one to give me just 1 minute about what you do and how it relates to climate-smart agriculture. So joining us is Ben Renchie, owner and manager of Blue Diamond Farming Company. Sammy Osman, policy director at the Climate Action Reserve, former colleague of mine. Good to see you, Sammy. Sonia Hu, managing director and partner at Boston Consulting Group. And Julian Lings, senior sustainability manager at VF Corporation. So Ben, could you give us a minute about yourself and why you're here? What's your interest in carbon farming?
Absolutely. I'm a sixth-generation farmer. I farm in northeast Iowa. I'm straight south of Minneapolis and straight west of Chicago, if you draw those two lines on the map. We farm corn and soybeans on a large scale on our farm, and we're constantly improving our model to do those things.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sammy?
Hi, Max. Good to see you. Thanks for having me. So my name's Sammy Osman, a policy director at the Climate Action Reserve. So we are a non-profit that's been around for, I think, just over 20 years now. A lot of that time has been focused on generating robust carbon market. So we have a voluntary offset program, and we do have a couple of offerings specifically for farmers. So very excited to be joining you and speaking to you about those specific opportunities.
Great, thank you. Sonia?
Hi, I'm a managing director and partner with Boston Consulting Group, or BCG, based in Washington, D.C. So BCG is a global consulting firm. We support clients across, all industries and functions, and climate and sustainability has really been an increasing area of focus as it's become an important topic at the C-level suite with our clients. We're also the consulting partner this year for COP26. I personally work with food and agriculture companies to define and operationalize their sustainability strategies, and also with foundations and nonprofits to help them create partnerships both in the US and in the developing world. And then on a personal level, I grew up in a restaurant in South Carolina, so food is near and dear to my heart.
Great, thank you. Julian.
Thanks, Max, and great to be with you all. Greetings from Switzerland over here in Europe. So I've been with VF Corporation for 6 years. I primarily work with the North Face, working on their sustainability program. Our interest in this area ladders back to our targets around sustainable materials. We have a goal to transition all the cotton we use to being either recycled or regenerative by 2025, and we've been very fortunate to work with Indigo Ag on developing our regenerative cotton strategy, which we are excited to be moving forward towards our 2025 goal with them on.
Great, thank you. So I thought we could start our conversation just around carbon markets and offsets at a general level. So Sammy, I'd love for you to kind of give everybody a bit of grounding. What's a carbon credit? What's a greenhouse gas crediting program? What's a registry? What does that mean? And what is high quality? What is that? Who says that something is high quality, and what does it mean?
Sure, thanks, Max. Maybe to start with, I'll go back to how our organization came about. So we are a non-profit that was set up by the state of California some 20 years ago. And the initial idea was to get people familiar with how to, what a greenhouse gas footprint is. So what does it mean for your organization to understand all of your greenhouse gas impacts? And then from there, we went on to form a carbon offset program and essentially allow those companies to use that offset mechanism to reduce their footprint. So given that we've been around for so long, you know, we've been at it for quite a while and helping develop some of the best practices that are out there, a lot of the core principles that are used in carbon offset programs around the world. So I'm assuming we're going to delve into what some of those principles are. But in essence, you know, if you can go out there and find a program like the Climate Action Reserves or a number of our peers out there, then the longer they've been around might sort of give you a sense of you know, how committed they are to those principles. And then I'm sure they all transparently espouse what those principles are and how their programs fit them. So in terms of how a project is developed, there are usually two main stages. First of all, a company like Indigo comes along and says, we're interested in doing a carbon offset project, and they engage with the carbon offset program. Usually there's a little bit of minimal information that goes forward at that stage so that we can get a sense of, you know, are they eligible? Is this likely to be something that works? In our program, that's called a listing stage, but in other programs, it's called a validation stage, where sometimes there's also a third party that's involved that does a little bit of checking. From there, the project pops up on the registry system. So each of those offset programs uses software to show the world, these are the projects we have. A lot of the information that we talked about will be made public. So anybody who's interested can go along and take a look and see, okay, look, Indigo Ag's got a project there. Let's explore the documents and see what it really means. And then from there, the real work starts, where Max and others will be spending a lot of time going out there and gathering a lot of data, bringing it forward. And there's usually a third-party audit mechanism built into every program, which is a really robust check. Indigo's currently going through that now. It's a lot of work. And then once that stage is complete, all of that information goes to the auditor. They do a very, very thorough check, and then they sign off on it. It then comes back to the offset registry. We grill them again. We go through everything. And once we're comfortable, we say, sure, there you go. You're ready to get your offset credits. And at that point, the offsets pop up in the registry system. And then from there, that's it. You've got your offsets, and we go from there. So that's probably a good overview. So maybe I'll stop there.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And you know, following up on that, you mentioned that there are other organizations like your own. Are you regulated in any way? And are there, you know, what are the principles that you would find common among those organizations?
Ooh, that's a good question. So we are a voluntary offset marketplace. So no, we are not regulated in that sense. However, of late, there have been a number of efforts where a lot of industry stakeholders have been getting together to see if we can create together some sort of overarching regulatory body. There's some efforts by Mark Carney out of the UK, I think there's at least one panel discussion on that, where a lot of those players are voluntarily coming together to see if we can create some sort of framework like that. At present, there isn't one though, but that doesn't stop us from collaborating closely. For instance, another of the major registries, Vera, the Climate Action Reserve, we work closely with those to make sure some of the key fundamental principles are aligned, how we approach those. And then there are a number of other, long-standing registries that have great reputations out there that also stick to some of those main rules. Some of the main principles, they can be a little bit confusing and convoluted, but there's principles like additionality. We need to make sure that whatever the indigos out there are doing is something new, and they're not simply getting credits for things that happened yesterday that would have happened anyway. And then we also have to look carefully at making sure any credits are issued are robustly quantified, that they meet best available science, that they can be independently verified, for instance, and that they're conservative. We don't want to go out handing more credits than what we think is probably a reasonable assessment of what the number should be. And there's probably a number of other principles that we'll talk about, but those are probably the main ones. So maybe I'll stop there.
Great, appreciate that. So now that we've created credits through these principles in the registry system, Sonia, could you tell us who's out there buying carbon credits? What drives carbon buyers, and what sort of trends are we seeing right now in the market?
Sure. So I think, probably those of us who are in the room or listening to this realize that companies are making really bold commitments around their climate change and sustainability goals, and that's being driven by investors, consumers, their own employees. And I think even over the last year, we've seen those commitments escalate, whether it's net zero on an increasingly short timetable, becoming climate positive, and so on. And I think hand in hand with that, they're realizing that they actually can't meet those commitments without looking at their kind of Scope 3 emissions in their supply chains, and also without looking at offsetting and purchasing carbon credits as part of their overall sustainability strategy. And I think they're again also realizing that purchasing carbon credits is one tool of many that can help provide financing and capital for climate change solutions. So I think it's really companies, all along the spectrum, both those that have agriculture in their value chains, but also those that are looking for other types of or portfolio of climate change solutions. In terms of trends that we're seeing in the marketplace, I kind of see three big ones. One is the volume of credits that are being demanded and purchased has increased significantly over the last few years. Again, I think driven by what I just described. I think buyers are becoming more sophisticated, and they're caring more about some of those quality attributes that Sammy just discussed, whether it's, more measurability, and also credits that have specific attributes or what we call co-benefits, and other benefits that come along with them. And then I think last of all, and perhaps most importantly, is that their willingness to pay has really increased. I'll use, BCG as an example. If you think about an average carbon credit portfolio being in the $4 to $6 a ton range, we're committed to getting that portfolio up to $35 a ton by 2025 and $80 by 2030 to really move the price of carbon towards what we think is the truer price of carbon.
Great, that's really helpful. So Julian, from where you and VF Corporation sit in this equation, trying to reduce your own emissions in your supply chain or through credit purchases, how do you guys think about agriculture in that realm and how it fits in with what you see in the carbon market?
Yeah, I think we see agriculture playing a huge role as a way of fostering nature-based solutions for climate. It has huge potential, and as an organization, we rely on farming hugely. We source a lot of natural materials, primarily cotton, but also wool as another one which is used by a lot of our brands. And we really see the need to engage down our supply chain right at the farmer level to help to foster these nature-based solutions. It has so much potential. We always think with nature-based solutions for climate around forests, but agriculture has a huge role to play. 38% of the world's surface is agriculture. That's 5 billion hectares. As a potential to have an impact, that's enormous. I think in the last 60 years, we've talked so much about how agriculture has solved the problem of feeding the world, but actually it now has an incredible role in addressing our great crisis today, which is the climate crisis. And as a nature-based solution provider, it has so much potential, and I think we're still really very much in the early stages of our journey of understanding how best we can play our role in that and working alongside the farmers in our supply chain. But it's an area we're looking very closely at as we move towards our materials targets.
That's really helpful, thank you. So as we start to think more about how agriculture fits in here in the carbon markets, I'd like to go to you, Ben, and take us out of the ivory tower part of the discussion, take us on the field. What does this mean to a farmer? What are you being asked to do, and how does it change your operation and your decision making?
Well, let's just switch roles for a minute. Why don't you all be farmers? And my family's farmed in this location for 160 years. And the first thing you have to do is be economically sustainable. You have to live on a budget. You have seed, tractors, land, fertilizer, barns, things to pay for, labor, employees, family living. So you need a way to fund that. And farmers, a common misinterpretation of the production system is that you can just switch and do anything. You have to do what's the highest and best use on your farm. In Iowa, it's a corn and soybean farm. In other parts of the country, you might be a dairy farmer or a wheat farmer or a cotton farmer. So you've got a very tight budget to live on, and you can't bear as much risk as you might think. So to do some R&D on your farm, to change your production system, you need a revenue stream. Well, my mission when I wake up in the morning is pretty simple. I want to feed people, I want to provide for my family and employees, and I can't risk my production system so that I'm financially unsustainable. And so I need a revenue stream for R&D. And if I'm going to, some of the first steps in more regenerative farming are to till less, use less inputs, keep green cover crops on our fields over the fallow months of the year during the winter months. And to do those strategies aren't necessarily free. They take machine time, they take fuel, they take seed, they might impact your future crop. So when there's the carbon market forming, all of a sudden, if I can get paid to do things, it kind of becomes like a new harvest for me. It's a new crop, and I can change the way I can do things to make it better and more friendly for the environment, and still work on ways to find keeping our food system adequate.
That's great. I like the idea of it as a new crop, as a carbon crop alongside corn and soybeans. So something you're trying to optimize yield, right? And make
No farmer wants to spoil the land. Like I said, I'm 6th generation. Our family's been here 160 years, and we modify the way we plant our crop and harvest it every year. We tweak something. So this is just what I need at the right time to make it better.
That's great. Julian, coming back to you, since you have significant agricultural component in your supply chain, and you talked about your efforts around cotton, can you speak to some of the challenges inherent in addressing supply chain emissions related to agriculture, particularly in where VF sits in the supply chain, and how it's helping you meet your climate goals?
Yeah, thanks, Max. It's a great question. When we look at our emissions as a corporation, over 99% of those are in our supply chain, in our Scope 3. And really, if we're going to meet our science-based targets, we have to go back and look at where our raw materials are coming from, how they're processed, how they're manufactured, because that is the bulk of where our emissions are coming from. Now, is that easy? No. It creates new challenges in the sense of we have to foster relationships further down the supply chain where traditionally the textile industry hasn't had those. It's had more commonly had relationships with its tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. We're really talking much further down the supply chain. And that's something that challenge we have to address, but it's also an opportunity. You know, one of the things I get really excited about when we talk about regenerative agriculture and the potential for cotton is I can connect with farmers like Ben and tell those stories, you know, and when we think about how we tell the sustainability story to the consumer, you know, we as humans, we remember narratives, we remember stories. It's not necessarily about numbers and figures. And actually, by having these deeper relationships right down to the farm level, we can bring those stories to life. And so although there are challenges about creating new relationships, I really do see it as a way of creating new opportunities as well. Whether that be telling the stories of our merino wool suppliers in New Zealand who are shifting towards regenerative agriculture for wool, or cotton suppliers in the United States who are making this shift. I really feel it's a way that we can help bring this story to a place with the consumer where they can emotively engage with it. Sometimes I think in sustainability we're very guilty of making it very, very complicated and not necessarily very human. And actually this is a great way that we can humanize and create that emotive connection with this work.
That's great. I mean, I feel the same way, that agriculture is so special because you get that all 3 Ps, right? The people, planet, profit. And you really get some amazing people that none of this would happen without them. Sammy, coming back to the technical and policy side of things, as you work with a lot of different types of carbon projects, right? Not just agriculture. So is there anything particularly different about a project developer, making changes on Ben's farm versus a wind farm versus landfill gas or organic waste diversion, which would work with the last panel? Anything different about agriculture that makes it harder, easier?
Yeah, great question, Max. Yeah, definitely there is. I mean, first of all, we're having to engage with a wide set of stakeholders, and not only that, but a new set of stakeholders. We're going out there and we're getting to know Ben and other farmers. So that's really important, forming those relationships and capacity building, making sure people understand what those core principles are and who we are, and that we've been here for a long time trying this. Otherwise we're just like anybody else that shows up at the farm gate trying to sell something new to the farmer. Their business is already very complex. They don't need to be sort of led in the wrong direction. So making sure we spend the time with that new set of stakeholders is going to be really important. So we're trying to do that a lot. Aggregation is going to be important. And what we mean by that when we're talking about aggregation in offsets is really collating a bunch of smaller projects together. Typically, in an industrial setting, there's going to be a massive amount of emission reductions happening right there at the single factory. So, it's pretty easy to put together a cost-effective project. But in an agricultural context, it's going to be more like, a bunch of pennies scattered all around the place. So we need to go around and collect all those pennies together, bring together many, many farmers so that we can form a cost-effective, much larger project at scale. And that's exactly the type of challenge that Max and the folks at Indigo are going through right now. So aggregation is likely going to be pretty important here. And then data, in an industrial setting, you're lucky enough to be able to just press a button and the machine sort of spits out whatever information you need. But in this brand new context, we don't have that. We don't have that sort of long legacy of absolutely everything being, data point being captured by the farmers. So we're going to have to work together to come up with effective means to gather the data that we need and to safely share it. So that'll include talking to folks like Ben and getting to understand, well, what data do you already have? And you're already sharing a lot of that data with the USDA. So let's work out efficient ways to do that, efficient ways to collate it, efficient ways to share it. So there are a lot of great efforts out there by USDA and collaborations like Open Team and others that are helping us understand frameworks and tools to be able to efficiently gather data and share it safely so that we keep Ben and other farmers' data safe. So there's just a few examples of where this really is a dawning of a new challenge for us here that we're all learning how to do together.
That's great. You know, sort of building off the topic of data collection, Ben, I'm curious how technology has changed things around carbon farming for you as a farmer, and whether it's making the barriers to entry lower and what specifically is changing.
Well, agriculture in general, we farm by the foot now, rather than broad acre, one solution, one size fits all. We change our fertilizer rates, our seeding rates. We have the monitoring systems on our harvest machines to gather the information. But the idea of collecting the information that allows us to scorecard carbon is really one of the most exciting developments in my career, because right now as a farmer, what I get paid for is yield. How much did I grow as a bulk commodity at whatever the environmental or a cost? And this is a real change in the paradigm, that now there's a pathway for me to get paid to farm better by those that care to make the system better. So technology is everything. Eventually, I hope we have technology that actually measures actual carbon rather than scores practices, but this just opens the door to innovation. Anything's possible now.
Mm-hmm. And in your case, and what you might consider to be typical of farmers, does a farmer just jump into the pool, put all of their fields into a certain practice, or is it a kind of journey that you move in a small area or small changes over time and build?
Well, once again, taking everybody back to the position of being a farmer, you probably have a proven production system that produces a lot of food right now. You don't want to risk that because you can't risk your budget and you don't want to risk the food production. So, for instance, we've gone from 0 to 25% on my farm in the past 4 years. I have employees whose families depend on the livelihood of my farm, and I just can't say, oh, we found a better way overnight. I mean, incrementally, that would have been instituted a long time ago if we found the better mousetrap, the better light bulb. So the digitization, the ability to sell carbon as a new crop is just, it's going to fundamentally change what we do on the farm. And as I say, we'll get paid for something other than yield.
Gotcha. Sonia, coming back to you, now that we're able to create an asset on the farm, and that's going out into the marketplace, what do you see in terms of demand for agricultural carbon credits specifically? And, are there differences between ag carbon credits in terms of the particular companies that want to buy them? Are there differences in terms of the way they get priced or used or traded? Any insight you could offer there?
Sure. So I think there are some differences and some similarities. So I do think that there are companies that have food and fiber in their supply chains, as Julian was talking about, that are looking for ways to tackle both the emissions coming out of their own supply chains, but also to help, catalyze and create solutions in the sector that everybody can benefit from. So I think there's an incentive there from companies to both capture the value of what they're doing for themselves and for others, but also to create solutions. And that's, not just the carbon credits themselves, but the standards, the knowledge base around practices and what works and what doesn't work and so on to push everybody forward. So I think there's that part of it, and one sort of segment of agricultural-based carbon credits. I think there are also companies, as I said before, that are looking to make big commitments, and those could be in any sector. We see a lot in the technology, financial services companies that are just looking for carbon credits and solutions that are, that exist today, one, and are cost effective. I think too that result not just in emissions reductions, but also can result in carbon removal, which we know is needed to meet, kind of our global goals as a world. And then also has other benefits, whether it is more sustainably grown food or improved adaptation and resilience and livelihoods for farmers such as Ben and others, and just a more sustainable food system. I think particularly given all of the disruptions, whether it's from COVID that we've seen or we'll see in the future from climate change. And so I don't think that's going away in the near term. I think we're going to learn more about what works and what doesn't work in different circumstances, and that state of play is going to continue to advance. But I think those are some of the big demand drivers and consumers here.
That's really helpful. Julian, you've talked about VF's commitment to, was it cotton being recycled or regenerative by 2025, I think you mentioned. And I know you guys have many brands under the VF umbrella. Could you speak a little bit to how you work on this, within your company, sort of between all these different brands, and how you also collaborate with other companies? Do you collaborate with other companies to drive this forward?
Yeah, so Max, you're absolutely right. VF has a family of brands which are very different. There are those like the North Face, which sit firmly in the outdoor and action sports area, and others which sit more in the lifestyle space, like a Timberland or a Napa Perry. And because of that, each of those brands, they do use different materials and they have different needs. A brand like Vans, for instance, is a big user of cotton and rubber because of the products they make, whereas contrastingly, a brand like Icebreaker or Smart Wool are hugely focused on wool, because that is what they're known for. That's what they're famous for. At this point, the brands are leading the development of key programs to learn more about regenerative agriculture for different commodities, whether that be cotton, leather, rubber, wool. But they're not doing that in silos. Many are collaborating together on projects where there are natural overlaps, or where they're just trying to share the key learnings, because this is a process that we're all having to figure out as we go. It is still very new for us, and there is a lot to be learned just by sharing between those brands. And we'll use those learnings to help us scale our efforts in this area. There are some things we can share between the brands, but at the same time, every brand will communicate differently to the end consumer. The way that North Face communicates to its end consumer will be different to how, Eastpak or Timberland used to do so. And there needs to be that freedom to be able to communicate different ways, while also making sure that we have the right guardrails to say it, to make sure that we aren't overclaiming what we're doing. As well as having great connections between the brands inside the VF group, we're fortunate also to have great connections with many of our peers and have the opportunity to share and learn where possible in this area. And I can't stress this enough, we need to foster those connections and chances to collaborate, as we have a very small window of time to bring around the kind of changes we need to address the challenges the world are facing. So by finding new ways and accelerating the pace at which we collaborate, will probably be the only way we create the changes that we all need.
That's really important, yeah. Sammy, I'm curious on the supply outlook. Are you seeing a lot of interest in people coming to you who want to develop new carbon farming projects?
Yes. I mean, our registry has a public-facing function, so you can go in there and see that. I think at present there are a small number of projects that are publicly listed at this stage, but softly I can tell you, it's just us in the room, that there are a good number of other companies out there that are very actively exploring the space and seeing how they can contribute, and that could be in various ways, but certainly there are a lot of parties interested in developing projects. they've been, we've collectively been at it for many years, and I think now is a really exciting time where we're seeing brave folks like Indigo and like Ben out there that are happy to sort of take some of those initial steps and risks and prove the concept. And I think hopefully we're on the cusp of a good number of projects flooding in and a good amount of supply. Right now, I think the demand for offsets is very, very strong and will probably outstrip supply for a good time. One of the benefits of that, though, is that hopefully the prices will be, strong enough to make it worthwhile for the Indigos and Bens out there, and the prices will continue to rise. So once these projects slowly come to market, we'll hopefully see more and more joining them.
Last question here for you, Ben. As we think about all these new projects that are going to be flooding into Sammy's inbox soon, behind each of those projects is going to have to be a lot of farmers. And I wonder if you could give us a word on what you think it will take to reach sort of the next wave of farmers who have been more reluctant to adopt some of these practices and to get the practices to stick.
Oh, it's not unlike any other industry. Farmers love to do what we do. I mean, I want to provide your next meal. I want you to enjoy it. I want it to be ample. I want anybody who's wants food to have food, and I want to not spoil the earth when doing it. Some of the techniques that we've used in the past to be highly productive aren't terrible, but they're not the best we can do on taking care of the earth. And so this is just going to build. It's going to snowball. There's been some payments made already. In fact, it's quite exciting. I received just about 10 days ago, my first check for sequestering carbon with recent crops for practice changes. I've, in other words, made my first harvest. The word is spreading fast. And I think, like every other business, the leaders have found this, and it's just going to grow. You're going to follow the leader and learn that you have a new crop to sell.
That's great. Thank you. We have a couple of minutes left, and I'm curious if anybody here in the room does have a question. There's one right here in the middle. So I'm not sure if you guys could hear that. But I'll summarize and provide a bit of an answer, and then maybe Sammy, if you want to jump in. So the question is around how do we actually measure the impact? Are we simply paying for a practice and then selling a ton to the buyers with a disconnect in between, or is there measurement? So what I can say in the project that Indigo is engaged with, we are directly measuring the impacts on the field. And it's a combination of both measurement and modeling. So there are soil samples happening on farms across the US, and then there are biogeochemical models. So we're collecting management data from all the farmers. So when Sammy and Ben talked about data collection, it's actually quite a bit of data. We need historical data. We need to know what they were doing before they decided to make a change. And then we need to know what they're doing each year that we're going to credit them. Those management data then flow into this model as inputs. So the model, you can tinker with it, how much carbon is there in the soil now, and then what crop are they growing, and the weather goes into it every year. And with carbon offsets, you have a project measurement and you have a baseline measurement, and you got to compare the two and take the difference. That's what you credit on, right? And so both the baseline and the project have to account for what the grower was doing and what they're doing now and what's the weather this year. So it actually, there's an immense amount of quantification that goes into it. I think where we'd love to get in the future is the ability to just sense the carbon in the soil. Right now it's very labor intensive, right, to take soil samples. You can use statistics so that you only sample a sample of your population. But hopefully, as this massive amount of data starts flowing into these programs, the scientists can continue to do their work and see if we can start to correlate that with remote sensing and other forms like that. Sammy, is there anything you'd add to that in terms of how Ben's practices get turned into tons?
Yeah, great question. So absolutely there will be measurement, not just magical numbers popping out of a black box. So first of all, or the Indigos out there will be talking to the farmers and trying to get a bunch of historical records. So ideally, we can mine a lot of the data that Ben's already shared, for instance, with the Farm Service Agency and USDA. And so it's robust data that's already been reported, and third parties have already looked at it. And we have, ensuring veracity of the data. And then there'll be a bunch of other data points, collecting all the records that we can, fertilizer receipts and time and date stamped photographs. Hopefully we'll start to use more advanced technologies more and more, such as remote sensing, so we can see when water's covered a field, or when it's been tilled, or when it's been harvested, for instance. So there'll be all sorts of data points that we are going to be capturing. And as Max said, there's going to be also some direct measurement, actual soil samples, folks going out there with a shovel and digging up the soil and sending it off to the lab to get tested. In time, we hope to see emerging technology play a role there as well, as Max mentioned, for instance, direct measurement of the soil carbon by probes and whatnot, and there's some really exciting developments on the forefront there. So certainly there is a lot of data capture, a lot of humans involved, and then hopefully more and more technology over time to sort of help streamline it.
Great. Thanks, Sammy. So I believe we're out of time. I'd really like all of you to help me thank our panelists for all of their insight and generosity today. I hope that this discussion leaves you with maybe some optimism about some of the ways that agriculture can be a climate solution. And I think a newfound respect is what I've gotten for some of the challenges and the work that needs to be done. So hopefully we'll all look at our plates a little bit differently and think a little deeper about what's going on in the system that brought that food to us. Thank you.